Hey YouTube, hi Spotify. It's Kel coming to you today. We're going to actually end the series that we were doing on the manipulation tactics, and today we're going to talk about something that I don't really hear talked a lot about, and in the future we're going to do some videos on trauma, because I did do work with trauma and in trauma for a very long time throughout my private practice. But just the one little bit that we're going to talk about today is the way that trauma can manifest in relationships. Okay. So, and one of those ways is, and the word is hypervigilance. Okay. So, and we'll talk about how that manifests in just a sec, but hypervigilance is basically, imagine the feeling that if way back in the days when we were evolving, people might have to like sleep in the woods at night, right? And the feeling of hypervigilance is basically being like kind of obsessively focused on the environment, trying to basically scan for anything that could possibly be unsafe. Okay. So again, the definition is kind of like, if back in the day, if you were, fell asleep in the forest way back, in the archaic days, and you had to sleep in the forest for some reason, or just at night outside. And if you heard something scary, a scary noise, the sound of a bear or something like that, you would in that moment become hypervigilant. Okay. So again, hypervigilant is like, okay, and just giving some examples of it, but if you say you came back from a war, and so because of the things that you saw and experienced that were traumatic over there, you might come into a restaurant, for instance, that you're going to eat dinner at, and purposefully sit with your back to up against the wall so that you can have the view of the whole restaurant. And again, people do it without knowing it, or sometimes people walk into clubs or big environments and they scan for an exit. That can also be a sign of hypervigilance. So, obviously it could also be like claustrophobia, but in a lot of times, especially if you're sitting against the wall and you have to scan or basically have a view of the restaurant or whatever environment you're in, that can be an indication that you may struggle with hypervigilance. And hypervigilance, what it is when the amygdala in our brain, which is the fight or flight it's a warning system. It goes it's kind of like bing, bing, bing. If there's a warning, if there's something unsafe in the environment, your amygdala will shoot basically adrenaline into your body through the sympathetic nervous system in a stress response. And everything kind of just becomes a little bit more acute when your body is filled with adrenaline, and you're a little bit mentally sharper because you're scanning. You can also have foggy brain, but typically you are more alert and kind of you're basically scanning the environment for any danger. Okay. So now you're like, why are you explaining all this to me? Because hypervigilance can be a trauma response to a traumatic childhood. And again, we're going to go into just all trauma and its symptoms and its interventions and everything like that in the future. But there are big T traumas, and that's like if you were in an earthquake or a really bad car accident or some event that truly made you feel powerless and you felt your life was in danger. Okay, that is big T trauma. There is also a lot of what we call, or I call, but the trauma industry calls small T traumas, where it's basically an event where you don't feel safe, which triggers an environment, response in your body to, kind of get into what's happening. I got to make sure that I'm okay. Now, this can happen in many, many ways in childhood. And again, we'll get into that in the future. But today we're just going to talk about, I'm going to give an example. If you had a very angry / intimidating parent figure, okay, you may start to develop hypervigilance to try to read their signals, read their facial expressions, read, how they're doing, so that you can try to prevent some anger outburst. Okay, as a child, you think that it's within your control, which is really not. But so you kind of develop this idea that if you can just kind of walk on eggshells and do enough to not set that person off, that you will be safer, okay? But the whole point of this video that we're talking about is what I want to talk about is called like an excessive focus on the other person in hypervigilance versus your own self, okay? What can happen if you grew up in an environment with an angry parent or with anybody who, again, there's lots of reasons to develop hypervigilance. You know, could be neglect and you feeling like, where's my food going to come from? There's a lot of basically unsafe environments that could create hypervigilance in you. But what happens in trauma is you detach from your own body and you get disconnected from your body and you go into, I'm going to focus on the external environment and, you know, what's out here because I have to be safe. Okay. I have to make sure that I'm safe. So there is zero judgment in this. Hypervigilance is very much your brain trying to protect you from danger. Okay. So, but a lot of times as you learn, you know, when you carry that into adulthood, sometimes your brain can then ultimately see threats where there are not any because your amygdala was so used to firing in a different environment. Okay. So, but what we want to talk about is just today, I'm kind of focusing it on there. I could talk about this for hours, but just today we're going to talk about sometimes a response or residual effect of trauma is an excessive focus on the other. Now, the other could be a mother or father figure. It could be, you know, a complicated relationship that you're in. It could be a child who has problems. It could be, you know, so whoever you are in intimate relationship with. But one of the effects of trauma is that if you become hypervigilant, you can go into caring about that other end or trying to control that other person more than you do focus on yourself. And I'm all about loving your intimate partners and, you know, your children and your parents, of course, right? But the difference between a healthy love and kind of like where you know you're hypervigilant is that there's some kind of anxiety linked to your observation of their behavior or you know, you may go into trying to scan to read, is this safe to trust? Is it, are they okay? That kind of thing, especially if you're in a relationship with someone who has like an addiction problem, you may go into kind of a codependent stance of, and it can become hypervigilant. And the hypervigilance is from you experiencing some kind of trauma or unsafe environment, but instead of focusing on that in yourself, a normal response to trauma is to disconnect from your body, disconnect from your feelings, and just focus kind of almost obsessively or at least very analytically on your environment because you're, quote, trying to like figure out if it's okay or not. That's really, and again, this is a brain protection mechanism. There is zero judgment on this whole process, but I wanted to, you know, do this video because again, I've done private practice for so long and I did years and years of, I did work with, you know, abused kids and I did work with, you know, in addiction treatment centers. And so I have definitely seen how trauma ends up manifesting, and it does end up manifesting in relationships a lot. So, you know, like I literally just saw a video the other day that was basically saying that if you have fear, that it is a, quote, like mindset problem. And that's actually not true. When I saw that, first of all, it wasn't any kind of mental health professional saying it. It was actually just someone, you know, thinking that they know what they're talking about. But fear can be a very, very real response to previously experienced trauma, where your brain then ends up going into I'm scanning the environment for threats, and there is no judgment on this. Okay, this is where like you don't want to tell a PTSD war veteran like who has PTSD when they get back that if they fear loud noises, it's their fault, right? Like I'm kind of tired of people trying to blame, you know, negative emotions on some kind of mindset issue when yes, mindset does matter with people, but there are also very physiological things going on in our brains, especially in regards to trauma or like depression or something like that, that is not a choice. It is something, if you went to war Again, you're going to come back, and a lot of, like, say, veterans, if they hear loud noises, of course, they are going to have a physiological reaction that is afraid. Their amygdala is going to go off. Now, whether they choose to give into that fear, or not, or act on it or not, is a whole different conversation, right? But just experiencing fear, I never want us to get to a place in society where we are blaming people who have fears, especially if that fear is rooted in real previous trauma. If you had a person who had been, I don't know, sexually molested by their parent, for all their whole childhood, and then they entered into a relationship with, say, a man, or, and they were afraid that it was going to happen again. The thing is, that fear is rooted in real life history. You would not want to blame that person and say, you know what, that's a mindset thing. We just shouldn't be afraid, blah, 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 blah. No, it is that kind of fear. PTSD fear is a physiological response. And again, it's linked to hypervigilance. And yes, you can do exercises and you can process it and you can understand where it comes from. Okay, wait, this fear isn't real. It's not here with my current boyfriend or whatever. It stems from my dad's stuff. And also you can choose to not act on the fear, which I think is very important. If you choose to, say, hey, I'm afraid of this, but I'm going to do it anyways. I'm going to walk through the fear, right? But we do not want to moralize or judge fear in people when they have experienced previous trauma. And yes, you don't want to give into fear, because a lot of times when you act on fear and you avoid certain things or whatever, that fear just becomes bigger, right? So it is not a good idea to enable the fear, is kind of the words I would use. You do want to try to confront it and nullify it the best you can, but having it in the first place and experiencing it in your body, we never want to judge people who have fears, who have been through real life trauma, because what's happening is their brain is actually really trying to get one ahead of the game and try to protect them in advance. And so they're scanning. That is actually something we should, as a society, have sympathy for and empathy for, instead of judging them and basically telling them they need to get out of that mindset, Now, again, like I said, acting on your fears and trying to do things anyways is a very good way to actually reduce the fear, because what you do is you see that, oh, I am living in reality now that is not the same as the reality that traumatized me, right? So there's definitely a lot of good ways to treat it. But my point in all of this, again, is trauma, any kind of, like, especially traumatizing childhood or traumatizing previous relationship, can lead to hypervigilance, that's scanning. And then that scanning can lead to obsessive focus on the other versus yourself, right? The best thing you can ever do in life is to be in touch with your body, be in touch with why you're feeling certain things, what your feelings are, so that you are not driven compulsively by other people's behavior, right? You want to know exactly what's going on with you so that you can communicate it in a healthy way, so that you know your boundaries, so that you don't think you can control more in other people than you actually can. But the point is it's a very natural response and a very much a trauma response to detach from your body after trauma a lot, and then obsessively kind of focus or put your focus out here in your external environment, okay? So again, we actually see, when people have been severely traumatized, and I'm going to just say, like, examples of, like, people being kept in a basement or, locked up or something, they can have severe detachment from their body. And that is when you get things like, split personalities, or like psychosis, or just fractured psyche. So, but again, you don't want to ever blame the person who has been through trauma. And honestly, if there is one thing I see in society right now, it is just almost everybody has been traumatized in some way. There's a lot of fear, and a lot of it is just your brain wanting to protect you and make sure that everything is going to be okay. And I could name so many different professions, police officers, firefighters, nurses, doctors, you know, that experience trauma all the time. I mean, just there, I could go on and on and on, right? Systemic oppression can create trauma. There's a lot that can create trauma, but what's just important is for us to not judge the effects of that trauma on our brain, and for us to have compassion with each other. Like, oh, you have been through the ringer. You have been through a lot of trauma. Let's not blame you or tell you you shouldn't have fear. That is the least helpful thing I could think anybody could say is, you know, just get over it because fear is a mental thing and, you know, you just shouldn't have it, blah, blah, blah. I mean, seriously, anybody who says that has no idea what they're talking about when it comes to trauma. So, please have compassion with yourself. If you find yourself having a traumatized, you know, or traumatizing childhood or previous relationship, and if you find yourself detaching or disconnecting from your body in any way, and you find yourself obsessively focusing on your partner, your child, your parent, because you're so worried about them, I fully understand and validate that concern. And I do think it's good to be loving and kind and in reciprocal relationships, but just try to, if you can, you know, therapy can help you get back in touch with your body, your feelings, your actions, your behaviors, any way you might be participating in the whole dynamic. And just hopefully, my wish for you is that if you have been traumatized in the past, that you find and get yourself into an emotionally safe situation so that your brain can heal, because that is really a lot of times, that's why therapy can be so beneficial, honestly, is because you're human to human with what you feel like is a safe human being where you can kind of expose everything and you still feel emotionally safe with them. And that is very much a huge part of the healing of therapy. That's why, no offense to ChatGPT, it has a lot of great things, but like, it cannot provide the human to human emotionally safe environment where you reveal yourself and you are still, you know, cared about and accepted. And that kind of emotionally safe environment is what creates trauma healing. So I hope that if you've experienced trauma, I hope that no one judges you for your fears. I hope that someone says, you know what, that's not as crazy as you think it is. And that is actually a normal response to trauma. That's your brain trying to protect you. But also, let's like help you get back into your body and focus on yourself and focus on, you know, your feelings so that you can properly communicate your feelings, your boundaries, and all of those other things with that person that you're in a relationship with. So I hope this made sense tonight, but it was kind of, I'll do more videos in the future on trauma, its symptoms, what are the interventions, a lot of the things that maybe I've seen over the last 20 years, but I just hope that, again, you find emotional safety and you feel like you can heal and that no one judges you in the process, because a lot of trauma is a literal physiological brain issue, and healing it is also an experiential thing. So I send you a lot of love tonight, and I wish you the best wherever you are, and I'm wishing you health and happiness, and I will see you next time.